Well, the 2017 version of International Fight Week is officially in the books. And in the end, it's a memorable one, maybe not for all the right reasons. We'll get into that in a second. First, let me introduce these two fine gentlemen one last time. Of course, that is Shaun Al-Shatti. That is Marc Raimondi. I am Ariel Helwani. We are standing outside the T-Mobile Arena here in Las Vegas. UFC 213 just wrapped up. Earlier today, we told you about the news that the Amanda Nunez Valentina Shevchenko fight was canceled around noon Pacific time because Amanda Nunez fell ill. We will talk about that and the new developments since then in a moment. But Shaun, let me ask you about this first. Tonight, Robert Whitaker became the interim UFC middleweight champion. A very fun fight, an entertaining fight against Yoel Romero. But you were sitting there in the arena throughout the entire night. How would you describe the sort of feeling in the arena after losing that main event?
That's an interesting question. I think overall, I mean, it was an interesting card. I think the arena for the most part was into it, especially that fight. There was definitely a sense of tension within the arena. But overall, I'm not going to take anything away from him, man. I mean, Robert Whitaker, what can you say about that guy? First of all, I mean, his defensive wrestling, his defensive grappling has evolved to such an incredible level. And once he kind of figured out that, like, hey, I can evade and escape from these powerful takedowns and these clinches that Yoel Romero was getting into, he really seemed to open up his game. And even despite the leg injury or the knee injury, and he started throwing out these front kicks, really sucking the wind out of Yoel Romero. And it was just a very, very impressive performance. I mean, that guy's fight IQ, too, was one thing that stood out to me. There was one sequence midway through the fight where, they got into a grappling exchange. And as soon as the dust settled, Robert Whitaker kind of rushed over to his corner, like to be near his corner to hear them out and get through the sequence. Overall, man, I mean, that kid is 26. He's the run that he's been on through the middleweight division. To beat Yoel Romero and Jacare Souza back-to-back, that's one of the most impressive two-fight runs I can think of in recent memory, over a span of 4 months.
Today's events kind of felt like deja vu all over again. And maybe let me ask you this question this way. It felt a lot like the Khabib-Tony Ferguson situation where there was an anticipated fight, one of the top fights on the card, and we lose it just hours before the event. To me, back at UFC 209, felt like the crowd was almost depressed. Did it feel that way in there after losing the Nunez-Shevchenko fight?
I think that maybe early on it did a little bit. By the time the main event came, though, I feel like they were very much into that fight, especially in the later rounds when the fight was really hanging in the balance. I would actually compare it more to last year's International Fight Week when we had a main event, Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier, get called off at not quite the last minute like this one was, but that week. And another person someone who was not promoted by the UFC, Amanda Nunez, became a champion. Very similar now with Robert Whitaker, who is someone that the UFC probably has not told his story as well as they could. And now he is the champion, at least in the interim sense, and is probably going to fight Michael Bisping next. So it kind of felt to me like that. Like, here we have an interesting situation where we lose the main event, and now someone who not a lot of people really know is a champion in the UFC.
I thought Yoel Romero won the first and second round. I thought Whitaker won rounds 3, 4, and 5. How did you score the fight?
Exactly that way. I think that was, as far as close fights go, because it was a close fight, it was a pretty easy fight to score. I don't think you can really score it any other way. I think that's the way you do it. Romero clearly won the first 2 rounds. He hurt Whitaker's leg. Whitaker fought almost the entire fight, 4+ rounds with one bad leg. He even said it in the press conference that he injured in training camp. He thought it was back. It's fine. Romero kicked him or kneed him in the leg in the first round, and he really didn't have great use of that leg after that. But he came back and rallied adrenaline and allowed him to do it, I guess. Adrenaline and a great fight IQ, like Shaun said, allowed him to win, rally, and win the last 3 rounds.
Shaun, let me ask you, how did you score the fight?
I had it the same. I had him, Yoel Romero, taking the first 2, and then Robert Whitaker on one leg, man, being able to really sweep the last 3. That was incredibly impressive. And it really, to me, it's somewhat of a testament to kind of, we're seeing this more and more, the power of fighting, close to your natural weight class, or closer at least, and not sucking your body down and cutting all those pounds right before you're about to get in an athletic contest with another human being. Robert Whitaker, at 170, he was successful, but he was an up-and-down fighter. He would win some, lose some. He goes to 185. He rips off 7 wins in a row over this line of killers, and he just looks so impressive doing it. I think and we're going to talk about it later, but Anthony Pettis is another example, just this idea that you don't have to really suck in your body and kill yourself on these weight cuts to be successful.
Whitaker obviously fighting on that one leg and winning, very impressive. That was a big story. His takedown defense, I thought, another big story. But in a way, did Yoel Romero blow this? Did he lose it for himself? He was up 2 rounds to none and couldn't figure out a way to secure one more round. Clearly, he got really tired as the fight went on, and that has been the knock on him. But do you almost feel like he blew it as opposed to Whitaker winning it? You get what I'm saying?
I mean, I could see how someone could say that. Just because, like you said, Yoel Romero, the one thing on him has always been the cardio. That's always been the question, even despite, these third-round knockouts he has, which he has quite a few. But I'm not going to take anything away from a man who beat Yoel Romero, who handed him his first UFC loss on one leg. That is an utterly incredible accomplishment.
Okay, so what does this mean for the UFC? Because afterwards, Michael Bisping walked into the cage and kind of created some kind of brouhaha, if you will, a kerfuffle. No punches or shoves or anything like that, but he did kind of say that that was a fake belt and threw his belt on the ground and told him to go get it. And it was, to me, a sign that he was trying to really amp something up, because let's be honest, Whitaker is not Romero. There's not that heat there. He's just a very nice and proper guy. Was this sort of the worst case scenario for the UFC, Whitaker beating Romero, considering the fact that Bisping and Romero have been going back and forth for almost a year now?
I don't know if it's the worst case scenario, but as we talked about on the MMA Beat earlier this week, Romero would have been a much more compelling opponent for Bisping in many different ways. Romero was getting a lot of buzz this week for many different reasons, and he's a very interesting character. And Bisping was playing into that a lot, even going back to Romero's win against Chris Weidman, and they had that kind of back and forth in the arena that night. Tonight, Bisping took a Cuban flag and ripped it up and threw it at Yoel Romero. There was a lot of heat building, which, I mean, Romero was obviously very upset about that, as he didn't quite tell you, but got across, I think, pretty clear that he was very upset at the post-fight press conference. So there was heat there already. They almost even got into a little bit of a thing after the fight. They had to be separated after the fight. So that is lost now, and Whitaker is very much a sportsman. He is not a guy that builds fights and promotes fights in the way that Michael Bisping does.
Yeah, Dana White said in the post-fight press conference that the ship has sailed on the GSP Bisping fight. Still not quite ready to put that final nail in that coffin. So we'll see what happens there. Speaking of the press conference, as you mentioned, Romero talking about Bisping ripping the flag with that intensity. If you have not seen that clip, I do urge you to check that out. I also thought it was notable how well he handled the loss. I mean, his spirits were just, it was amazing. It was phenomenal to watch. He had a smile on his face. He said, "I'm healthy. I'll be back." Very impressive stuff from the 40-year-old. Let me ask you about the co-main event. Alistair Overeem defeats Fabricio Verdum. He now wins the trilogy. 2 fights to 1. He wins the last 2. Did you score it for him, though?
I did, but I think also it's a great illustration of the problems with the 10-point must system that we kind of use for MMA. It just doesn't work for MMA. You can't, this goes back to the Tyron Woodley Wonderboy rematch, man. Like, you can't look at that first round and tell me it's the exact same thing as that third round. It's just not. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We need to figure out some different way, because, yeah, I scored the first 2 rounds for Alistair Overeem, and I gave the third round to Fabricio Verdum, and it wasn't enough to do a 10-8 for me.
Sure.
But it's not the same, man. And if you go to prize-style scoring, even Fabricio Verdum wins that fight. It was frustrating. And also, just in general, like that, their rivalry and their trio of fights are the strangest trio of fights that I can think of, man. Like, all of them have been strange in some regard. All of them have been anticlimactic and kind of weird. I mean, the first one's a little different than the last 2, but yeah, it was a frustrating moment, I think, just in general, when you reflect back on the scoring that we use, because it's just not, it doesn't work in a lot of cases.
Did Overeem do enough, in your opinion, Marc, to secure that next title shot?
That's hard to say. I think we have to wait to see what happens between Francis Ngannou and Junior Dos Santos. If the winner of that, well, I think Dos Santos probably can't get the title shot no matter what he does against Ngannou, because he just lost to Stipe not too long ago. But if Ngannou wins impressively, he could somehow have the kind of inside track on that title shot more than the winner of this fight. It seemed like Dana White was kind of down on the Overeem victory for good reason. It's one of those fights where the judges got it right in terms of the rule set that's in place, but you still leave feeling unsatisfied by the results.
Anthony Pettis looked phenomenal against Jim Miller, perhaps his best performance since his win over Gilbert Melendez at UFC 181. Is Anthony Pettis back, or do we need to see a couple more performances like that at 155 before saying, all right, Showtime is back?
I mean, Anthony Pettis looked like Anthony Pettis, right? Like we've been hearing from him for a couple years now. Like, I'm going back to my roots. I'm gonna try to be Showtime again. It hasn't really translated, but it finally did today. I mean, he was dictating range really nicely. He wasn't finding himself getting backed up against the fence and kind of trapped against the fence like he has the past few fights. And ultimately, I mean, he talked about it before this week, during this fight week, that he really committed himself to like this newfound idea of weightlifting and building his strength in his body. And you could tell, man, like he looked bigger and stronger than he ever has before, and that was a really fun fight, man. Like it was really interesting to see the grappling exchanges between them and just everything stand up. It was nice to. It was almost nostalgic to kind of see Anthony Pettis be Anthony Pettis again. Yeah. And it's lightweight division. I mean, got a big boost in general with this weekend with Justin Gaethje, and now throw Anthony Pettis back in the mix. That division is unstoppable right now.
Yeah, I'm not ready to write him off just yet either. Let me ask you about Travis Brown. He loses his 4th in a row. He loses to Alexei Oleinik, and afterwards Dana White said that not only does he really not want to be in the Travis Brown business anymore, he thinks he should retire. Did you kind of walk away with that same sentiment that it's just not worth it anymore for Travis Brown after that performance?
I was really surprised that Dana White said that. I know that he says that fairly often.
And often throughout the retire word. Like he says that about like older guys who are getting knocked out, not guys like Travis Brown, at least not at his age.
Right, absolutely. He said it before, but really only in a case of someone who is clearly beyond their athletic prime, people who are getting knocked out. Travis Brown is a guy that was once a title contender and was once like someone people thought of as like the new face of the heavyweight division, this young up-and-comer, athletic, multifaceted, and now 4 losses in a row, he's not that guy anymore. And Alexei Oleinik has some very good strengths in his game, but he's really been a journeyman throughout his career. He's had a decent run in the UFC, there's no doubt about it, but he is not a guy that anyone would call a top 5 or top 10 talent. And he finished Travis Brown tonight. And you really do have to ask, where does Travis Brown go? I mean, the only person that really knows that is Travis Brown himself. I'm not going to come out and say that the guy should retire, but I think he at least needs to look inward and say, is this really what I want to keep doing?
Yeah. Clearly, he's not the same guy that he was a few years ago getting ready to fight Fabricio Verdum on Big Fox. Okay, here's what we know about the Amanda Nunez situation. She has not talked to the media. She put out a small, short post on Twitter, didn't say much, just said that she will be back. Dana White said that she was medically cleared. Her team said that she was very ill, transported to the hospital. We haven't asked her about that, really how she was feeling, was she cleared or not, but that's Dana White's story. Clearly, he seems to be upset about the fact that she did not take the fight. Valentina Shevchenko's team is saying that she was offered the fight on September 9th in Edmonton. That would be UFC 215, and now they are awaiting word from Amanda Nunez's team. And Dana White confirmed that that's what they would like to do. He also said that he is not keen on putting that fight in the main event slot after what happened today. Let me first ask you about Dana White's comments about Amanda Nunez being medically cleared and not taking the fight. Do you feel like that was the right approach as her promoter, as someone who has to now go ahead and at some point promote this fight? It's going to happen, to essentially put out the narrative that she was good to go and for whatever reason didn't take the fight. And you saw the comments from people, you heard from people in the arena. Was that the smart thing to do, to kind of throw her under the bus like that?
Well, it wasn't surprising.
Okay.
I'll say that. I mean, we've seen this before. This isn't anything new. I don't know what purpose it serves. I mean, he's not doing the UFC any services. He's not doing Amanda any services, that's for sure. And I don't know why we keep seeing this, frankly. I mean, this is a game where if you're not 100%, I mean, the first fight of the night, we saw a man get carted out on a stretcher, and he was down for a long time. You got to be in this 100%. I mean, Dana White's never fought. He can't say this is 90% mental and 10% physical. He's not in Amanda Nunez's body. She knows her body better than anything. You think she didn't want to fight? Like, this is a huge stage for her. And this is somebody who's done heavy lifting over all of 2016 for the UFC. I don't know what purpose it serves. Just as she's kind of becoming this figure of, this killer of Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate, this person who really took out these legends, to really just crap on her like this and make it a thing. so that now there's going to be this narrative, for better or for worse, among a a very vocal part of the fan base, that Amanda Nunez was scared and this and that, and it's just ridiculous. She's a professional fighter. She's a champion.
Right. She goes through an entire fight week, an entire fight camp. She cuts weight, she makes weight, she weighs in, she does all of that, and she gets to, hours before the fight, and all of a sudden she's scared. But it does sort of put out that sort of feeling that, oh, she didn't want to fight for whatever reason, and now you see fans. I mean, fans came up to me as I'm getting food. Could you believe Amanda was scared? Could you believe she pulled out? I don't see how that does anyone any favors.
It doesn't do anyone favors, and the notion that Amanda Nunez pulled out of this fight because she was scared is ridiculous, and frankly, it's offensive to even feel that way. I was getting angry reading Twitter earlier because of all the things that were being said. It doesn't make sense to me. First of all, Amanda Nunez has fought in more high-profile fights than this. She fought Ronda Rousey, who is the most famous fighter in history in terms of the mainstream, I think. She's fought Miesha Tate, headlining UFC 200, one of the biggest shows in UFC history. She won both of those fights by first-round finish in a matter of seconds. She's already fought Valentina Shevchenko and beat her. So why now all of a sudden, I'm getting agitated again, why now all of a sudden is she scared a few hours before the fight? She doesn't get paid. She had a six-figure payday coming tonight, plus pay-per-view points. She gets none of that now. She gets nothing after a long training camp. It does not make sense to me how anyone could think that she was scared. Obviously, something was wrong. We don't know what it is. We don't know if it was the weight cut, sickness, a combination of both of those things. We really don't know. It's all speculation. But I can tell you one thing that I do know. If she could have fought, if she felt like she could have fought tonight, she would have fought tonight. Yeah. And she clearly did not feel like she could have fought. I just spittle everywhere. I'm getting all upset. Okay. But she clearly felt like she could not fight tonight, and that's all good enough for me.
Shevchenko's team says that they were taken care of monetarily. Dana White said he thinks she got around $70K for her troubles, and hopefully we'll see them fight in September in Edmonton. Helwani on Jacek also spoke to the media, sort of stating her case as to why she wanted the fight, but of course, as we know by now, the Nevada Athletic Commission would not clear her. So a very unfortunate turn of events, and once again, third straight year that the main event of International Fight Weekend, for the second straight year, the main event gets pulled just hours before, essentially, the event. This is something that the UFC, I think, kind of wants to get away from and move on to 214. And by the way, speaking of UFC 214, they put out a promo today that, in my opinion, is the best in UFC history. Not only the best, but the most honest. It's about Jon Jones and his trials and tribulations and Daniel Cormier. If you have not seen it, go check it out. It is worth your time. They don't get it always right as far as marketing and promotion is concerned. They hit a grand slam with this one. Let's wrap up International Fight Week. Once again, a kind of roller coaster ride of emotions. When I say to you, 2017 International Fight Week, from the Hall of Fame to the tough finale to tonight, 213, what comes to mind? What will you remember?
I think the one ultimate big winner this weekend was Justin Gaethje. I mean, he came into this weekend as someone I think maybe had like 7,000 Twitter followers. He was a very kind of cult figure within MMA, where the people who knew World Series of Fighting and follow World Series of Fighting were always very excited for his fights, but it didn't translate to kind of that UFC only audience. And boy, were they introduced to him, man. When they showed him on the big screen today, I thought it was very telling. When they showed him in the arena, he got one of the biggest pops of the night. And it's only been 24 hours. I think the fans have really appreciated not only his style, but just his approach. We talked about it last night, this self-awareness of knowing, I'm going to get knocked out. This isn't, I'm going to lose eventually. Like, where's my equal? That type of thing. I think people really appreciate that level of honesty. And I think, all throughout this night, I saw on Twitter just people matchmaking for him. Like, can Justin Gaethje go to light heavyweight? Can Justin Gaethje go to middleweight? I think he's the ultimate big winner this weekend.
Okay, light heavyweight is a little crazy, but I appreciate
just joking of like, this guy's so exciting, can we get him everywhere, type of thing.
Absolutely. Your final thought?
I totally agree with everything Shaun said about Justin Gaethje. I think that he comes out of this one as the big winner. But when we look back at this weekend a few years from now, we could be looking at the real crowning moment of a future star in the sport, and that's Robert Whitaker. He's only 26 years old. If the UFC builds him correctly, and if he also contributes in the promotional sense, which I think that both of them will have to do now to ramp up that possible fight with Michael Bisping, I think that we could look back and say, in 3-4 years, the best middleweight in the world, it all started here in this great 5-round battle against Yoel Romero. That was his crowning, that was his star-making performance.
Great choices. I will go with JT Money. I will not forget JT Money and Jesse Taylor winning The Ultimate Fighter. what, 9 years after Tough 7, something like that, 8,
Yeah,
9
9.
years, unbelievable. The emotion, again, reminding me of the early days, at least of my career, covering that show. And look, I'll be honest, my interest in The Ultimate Fighter non-existent. I did not watch this season, but boy, oh boy, did that validate the redemption season. I am so fascinated by his story, to see where he can go from here, and it was just so amazing to tie that story that happened 9 years ago, the debacle of him getting pulled and now winning with the check, and talking about his kids and investments. That to me was the story of the weekend. I love that moment. It was a lot of fun covering it with both of you guys, the team behind the camera, Casey, Esther. A lot of fun covering this memorable International Fight Week once again for all of you at home. We appreciate it. And the fun does not stop from here. We've got the MMA Hour on Monday. Then we've got the press tour of all press tours, the World Tour, Mayweather, McGregor. It starts Tuesday in Los Angeles. Then we're off to Toronto. We're off to New York, then London. We'll be there at least for the first 3 stops. Not sure about the 4th. We'll figure that out later. For now, we'll get some sleep and maybe take a shower, because I'm schwitzing here. It's like a blow dryer in our faces. I mean, you have no idea what's going on. It's like 40 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but trust me, it is very hot. All right, we are done. For Shaun, yes?
Do you only do degrees in Celsius?
I keep it real. Yoel Romero asked me about my flag. That should tell you how I feel about my flag. Celsius for life. For Shaun, for Marc, I'm Ariel, Casey, Esther. Thank you so much for watching. We appreciate your time as always. We'll see you Monday for the MMA Hour. Good night.